Emotional habits. Okay, is anybody an incessant worrier? They tend to look at the concerns or the worries or the what might be the things I need to worry about or think about or be concerned with. Okay, maybe not anybody here. Oh, okay. Don't tell anybody. Tendency to judge. Others, self. Okay. Tendency to look toward the critical first rather than the praise. Okay. So I get home and the first thing I see is the bicycle that's outside in front of the door that's left open, the milk that got left on the counter, and it's like those are the first things that I see when I get home. And the teenagers are like, "Did you not take the dog out?" And I notice that habit is to see what's out first rather than what might have gone well that day first. So that's a habit for me that I'm working on getting rid of and surrendering. It's not a bad habit, it's just one I choose not to have anymore. Any other emotional, how about psychological ones? Well, I mean, those are really, they often get combined. So in other words, the thought of, for example, judging myself, of I didn't do that well enough, I got back from work, I didn't handle that situation well, I could have done better on that phone call, I definitely didn't prepare well enough for that lecture I was going to give, I should have done that, right? So those tendencies and then those thoughts can often lead to feelings, can't they? God, I always do that. Why don't I ever learn? Every time I do, I can't believe I do that. Now I'm starting to get a little angry at myself. I start noticing that I start feeling my blood pressure raise a little bit because now that judgment is leading to a little bit of frustration, which is leading to a little bit of anger, which then leads to disappointment. Why don't I learn? Why don't I ever learn that I should start 2 weeks in advance? Anybody do things like this, or is it just me? Okay, I just want to make sure. All right.
Using always and never.
Using always or never, especially in your languaging. You always do it that way. I always, every time, do it. Is that really true? No, but we often tend to catastrophize or make it larger than it often is. Now, what's the difference between a habit and an addiction? Ooh, we don't like that word.
Okay. It seems to me with addiction, you know you're doing it, but you just don't stop. That's me with food.
Okay, so that's one possibility.
It's conscious, but I can't see it.
Okay. So, number one, there's a fine line, and there's not really a clear, this is a habit and this is an addiction. Maybe I have a habit of having a cup of coffee every morning. It's not an addiction, it's just a habit. But if it involves alcohol, it's an addiction. What if I tend to have a pen in my mouth all the time? That's a habit, but if it's a cigarette, it's an addiction. Okay? So, the definition of addiction, dancing to cell phones. Okay? Okay. Addiction, different definitions, but helpful to point to what we're talking about. A compulsive physiological need for and the use of a habit-forming substance, like nicotine, alcohol, or others we'll talk about, characterized by tolerance, in other words, you get used to it, and you adapt to it, and you habituate to it, by well-defined physiological symptoms upon withdrawal as well. So in other words, you take it away, and it's not easy. Okay? Another one is a persistent or compulsive use of a substance known by the user to be physically or psychologically or socially harmful. And another one is a primary chronic disease. Again, these are just people's definitions, right? What point is it a disease? At what point is it a habit? At what point is it just a problem? Chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, related circuitry, characterized by an impairment in behavioral control, can't say no to it, craving, inability to abstain, and diminished relationships. Ooh, don't like the last one. Don't like that. Now, habits underlie addictions. Right? So in other words, addictions are based upon habits. Now, what happens is there becomes a physiological, neurochemical, hormonal, neurotransmitter type changes that happen from habits as well as addictions. When we take away, for example, with nicotine, if we take, nicotine has receptors on the cells, and we very much know about the chemical addiction, for example, of nicotine, but what happens after 100 days when the nicotine is no longer in your blood supply? You think people still have a craving for cigarettes even when the chemical's not there anymore? You betcha. So what's doing it? The nicotine's not in the system causing that addictive relationship anymore. Often it's the habit. It's the reward that we get, and we'll talk more about the reward system. So in other words, our environment, our external environment that reminds us of the habits and patterns and people and stresses and things, etc., that remind us of that are the underlying habits that can continue an addiction. Very important. So I'm going to use some different models, as I talked about, based on some of these different authors, and that's going to help me bring in some different ideas. So one of the ones that I want to begin with is from Charles Duhigg's book, and it's this. Cue to routine to reward. Cue, routine, reward. And basically, and then it cycles back. It cycles. And in the middle of this system is what we call a craving that drives it. So what does that mean? So in other words, with a habit, we have something that triggers the thought, I want that. Okay? So let's just say, okay, I had a really bad day at work, and I came home, and I'm feeling a little angry, a little depressed, and I want something sweet because I can. And I'm going to go pick up that pint of Haagen-Dazs. I'm probably not going to eat the whole thing, right? Right. Okay, that's maybe my thought, but I deserve that, and I want something sweet. So the cue might be that this is what happens when I'm on my way home from the office and I pass the Star Store and I can go pick up a pint of Haagen-Dazs on the way home. So the cue is the thought and the feeling. The routine is the picking up the Haagen-Dazs on the way home. The reward is the satiation of having what I wanted and having that in my belly and the taste and the feeling and all the senses associated with that. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. What might be another one? Give me some other pattern that works for you that might be something you do that has, let's just pick a pattern, pick a habit.
Glass of wine.
Okay, a glass of wine. So what might be the cue that makes you want to have a glass of wine?
The sense of just having a relief that a hard day is over with and it's a way to relax.
Good. So do you have it in the middle of your day?
No.
Good. Do you have it in the space after work and before dinner?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So there's a timing aspect to that.
Exactly.
There's a time also if you had, are certain days more likely to give you the sense of cueing of wanting the wine than another?
Yes.
Good. So maybe...
The busier I was and...
Good. So lots of
worked.
activity, busyness, kind of that sympathetic, kind of one of those kinds of days where your sympathetic nervous system is driving and you've worked hard and maybe not been as satisfying as certain other days. Okay. So the combination of the timing and the feeling of the way the day made you feel is the cue for, oh, it's time that I get to give myself a glass of wine. So those are the different cues. The routine is getting myself a glass, pouring myself a glass of wine. Right? All those, looking at the glass, tasting the glass, and all those are the rewards of, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Does everybody kind of understand that three-part system? Now, what marketers know very well, much better than we do, is how to establish the thing that really drives us to go from cue to reward, which means to develop a craving, okay? Which can be very chemical, for example, like in cigarettes and in other substances that actually more easily create cravings. But they've also looked at a variety of other things of how do I increase this? So one of the examples that Charles gave that was very interesting in product design was Febreze. So it was a good story. Because when they were doing Febreze, anybody use Febreze here? Mm-hmm. Okay, so...
I hate those commercials.
Hmm?
I hate those commercials.
I hate those commercials.
Oh.
Okay,
I
well...
would never buy Febreze
Yeah.
just because of those
Well,
commercials.
$500 million worth a year do.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. So what they found was when they were doing this Febreze, they actually found a chemical that took away odors. See, I didn't know this, because I always thought of it as a perfumed smell, But when it began, it was really a chemical that was able to distinguish odors. And they looked at, wow, this is amazing. People that have dogs, people that have other kids, people that have things that smell in the house, we have something to take away those smells. Who's not going to want that? And they did a variety of tests, and it did not do well. In this beta testing, people did not want to use it much, and they just started to go, why? This is crazy. This is an amazing thing, right? I mean, it sounds good at the beginning. And something really does what it says. And when they looked deeper, what they found was there was something about people really not wanting to admit to themselves that they had a smelly home. It wasn't very inspiring. It wasn't a very good driver to get a reward to now not have a smelly home. Not too exciting. When they started to review a lot of the different interviews with people, they found one woman that used it all the time, and they tried to look into that why. And for her, what it was when she finished cleaning the house, and the last thing that she did was she sprayed the sheets with some Febreze. That was like a, ta-da! It's done. It's a sense of completion. It's a sense of joy. Like, now it's done and perfect, and now I can just like kind of sit back and observe. And they said, wait a minute. That is a reward. A reward of completion, a reward of satisfaction, a reward of that I've done something well. It's like a pat on the back, and that was much more inspiring. And when they reworked their advertising campaign to advertise it that way, through the roof. And then they started to add different scents because many people, if you look at the sale of candles and many other things, that different smells and fragrances give people a sense of joy or relaxation, and so they started to add a lot of scents. And then after a period of time, they were able to deliver a non-scented one because as people started to get used to it, they liked the getting rid of the old smell, and they were able to have non-scented ones. So when you look a lot at different products, we need to realize how incredibly manipulated we are by this system. Do you think that the foam in shampoo does anything to make your hair cleaner? Do you think the foam in toothpaste or the menthol taste of toothpaste does anything? No, but it gives you a feeling. It gives you that minty clean feeling, that Listerol type feeling, that tingling. It just is an irritant on your skin. And it gives you a sensation that you have learned to equate with something being cleaner. But it has nothing to do with it being cleaner or healthier. You've been totally had. But they know it much better than we do. They understand how to create habits. It's their job to create profit for you to create a habit to buy their product. So they know the system way better than we do. Does that make sense? Wow, blue doesn't work so well. Take a commercial moment.
There's a chemical that'll take that off.
Even better than saliva?
Nothing is better than
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
So, like, I'm a nail biter myself, and
Yes.
so I can never determine. I read that book, The Power of
Okay.
Habit, and still trying to figure out, well, what is my reward? And I don't know if you're going to get into
Mhm.
that, but I just wanted to throw that out there. Like, I don't know what my reward is, and
Okay,
it's
good.
just a habit that I do. But
Okay.
anyway,
No, so the question is, and I can't answer that for you, but it's a
Right.
really worthy question,
figure that out.
right? So what is that? And so that'll take me in a slightly different direction, but that's all right. What is the reward? Now, in Charles' book, a really good example, and I'll just use it for others for a moment, was what he says, and what everybody will say is, when you want to change a habit, the first step is observing that you're doing it. Wow, I noticed that I do this much more than I do. Try watching yourself on videotape. Oh my God, I had no idea that I did this like 30 times a minute, right? So first we have to bring a sense of awareness to it. The next thing that we want to discover is, what is the reward, right? Number one, well, what is the cue for doing it first? That's really important. And second is, what is the reward? Because if we know what the cue is, and we know what the reward is, then we can start to influence that middle section. So, his example that was a good one was every mid-afternoon